And instead, let these lovely people here say things. Cansu Canca, who is an actual philosopher who knows things about responsible AI, and Casper Harteveld, who knows things about games. The topic of this panel is responsible AI for games, and I think it's an extremely timely and extremely important topic. We will see more about this during the conference, including during the day. We also want you to talk. So my main role here will be trying to get these people to hurry up to say their things and to sort of relay information coming from you guys so that these people can absorb them and sort of respond to you. Great, let's have them introduce themselves. Yes, this is also, by the way, we have a Discord channel where you can also write down the questions. I'm going to see if I can, especially for those of you who are remote, I'm going to try to sort of come in with some questions from the Discord channel as well. So please use the Discord channel for that. That's why I have a laptop here. But otherwise, we will have the microphones wandering around the room. Let's move forward. So, Cansu.
Okay. Hi, I'm Cansu Canca. I'm the AI Ethics Lead of the Institute for Experiential AI. So we have an institute called Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern, and we do research on AI, and also we work with the industry to provide consulting, help them deal with their AI-related questions, and my team particularly works on responsible AI questions. I'm also a research associate professor in philosophy. So that's all from me, and I'll talk more about responsible AI.
All right, I'm Casper Harteveld. I introduced myself in the morning as the general chair, and I promise to you I won't be speaking much more during the rest of the conference, except at the closing. But today I'll be, one of the people also talking about this. I run the Ghost Lab. There will be different ghosts, which are my PCs and postdocs running around, and hopefully you get to meet them. But other than that, yeah, I'm prepared to do research on games.
Oh, yes, Mike.
Yeah, so I thought we thought that Cansu, who actually knows about responsible AI, should introduce what the field is a little bit and talk through it. It's a brief one.
I like how you're like prefacing it like actual philosopher actually knows.
Yeah. I know people who like to have opinions, myself included, but let's have knowledge trumps opinions, right?
That's true. So we wanted to start with like what is responsible AI, because one of the worries that I generally have about this topic is like when we talk about ethics, to people who don't do ethics, it comes across as like a fluff topic. So we are just talking about feelings or things that cannot be, that cannot go beyond subjective taste matters and so on, and that's not the case. So when we talk about responsible AI, if we can go to the next slide. So we really are talking about, so let me actually say one more thing before. Like ethics is a part of philosophy, moral and political philosophy. Applied ethics comes from moral and political philosophy, and we have systems theories that we use to analyze any given situation and to make decisions that are coherent, consistent, and justifiable. So it really is finding like a reasoning, rationalization methodology to reach a answer or a set of answers that we can justify. And when we do responsible AI, what we are trying to do is, you can think of it as this bottom tree. So we are trying to make sure that the product that we are creating is ethical technology. So here, think about the algorithms, think about the data that goes into the algorithms. There's a lot of value judgment in the product already, and we want to make sure those value judgments that are already made, regardless whether you are doing it implicitly or explicitly, are made explicitly and with good reasoning. The other thing is the process. So as we are developing, as we are designing these technologies, as we are doing the research and testing of these technologies, can we make sure that they are done ethically? And the last one is the implementation. Once we create the technology, well, somebody has to use it, somebody has to engage with it. Can we make sure that the human-computer interaction happens in an ethical manner? So this really covers the whole innovation process. It starts from the conception of the technology, the idea, goes throughout the whole research, through development, through deployment, and it doesn't end, right? Like this is not a linear question, of course. Like as you're deploying, you realize there's a mistake, you go back to research. So you keep, ethical questions always remain, they just change shape. So if you're thinking about, for example, collecting data, so in the initial phase, for example, the privacy question could be about collecting data. Later phases, it might be about the user privacy, how the user interacts with it. And later you may also be thinking, well, when we are monitoring and testing, what happens to the privacy question? So the questions remain, they just change shape usually. And of course, it covers the whole innovation cycle as well as all aspects of the technology. So the data, the algorithm, the user interface, and the human-computer interaction. If we can join. So to make this, we can discuss these, like these are the ways that we approach how do you think about privacy, for example, as I said, in data collection and so on. You can approach them in a very academic manner, but the other thing is, of course, like how do we really put them into practice? A lot of ethics practice seem to happen in these, like, people think about ethics boards. You go and they say yes or no, and you proceed, and that's a terrible model. The way to think about ethics is like, it's a part of innovation, it's a part of collaboration. Ethicists are there to make sure that they help find solutions and not like a seal of approval. So to have that, we have a framework at the Institute that we implement. Basically, the goal is to do the middle road, the product road. So what we want to make sure that every single AI product goes through a ethics analysis and ethics troubleshooting structure. And in order to do that, in organizations, of course, you don't want to like rediscover the wheel every single time. You want to have a strategy in place. You want to get rid of a single board. You want to create a workflow that ethics is a part of, that does not create a bottleneck. And you want to have people, so the bottom line, you want to have people who we are not trying to turn everyone into ethicists. We are not trying to increase the workload. But what you want to do is like you have different responsibilities, different attentions paid by different people on the ethical questions. Some of them will just like flag the problems, some of them will escalate them, and some will be responsible for resolving them. But basically putting in place an ethics structure where every innovation we make sure that we create is good, well, at least not harmful to the society, ideally good for the society, but that might be too idealistic. But at least not harmful for the society, not harmful for the individuals. So this is the framework that we use, and I have one last slide, and I'm going to stop talking. And another concrete tool that we use to analyze a given product, a project, is a tool called The Box, very innovatively named by me, very creatively. And this is the first version of it. So we have now, I think we are now in version 3. So we expanded on this, but basically all of these concepts that you keep hearing about, like transparency, privacy, that we are going to talk in a bit as well, equality, how do they, like, basically what's the goal of them, and how do we make it such that we can operationalize them? So this is a little tool that we have where basically we put these concepts, these instrumental principles in relation to their goal. Because really, the goal is not, we don't value privacy for the sake of privacy or transparency for the sake of transparency. What we want to do is, we want to reduce harm, we want to make sure that individual agency, individual autonomy is protected, and we want to make sure that the systems we create are fair. That's really our goal. So everything else is a trade-off. So we want to make sure that we understand all of these different instrumental principles, and we start engaging in trade-offs. And this is one way of visualizing this decision-making process. So I think that's all from me for what is responsible AI. Of course, I'm happy to discuss as soon as you have questions.
Next. So then, of course, we should also define what games are. So we tried to get a little bit of Wittgenstein, but he wasn't available. We tried to get Sid Meier, also not available. Casper, what are games?
Let's skip this one.
Thank you. The in-joke is that this community has had enough of this question. Right, let's move on, Jeremy. So basically, the way we do this here is that I want a few comments on each of these topics. We have, I think, totally 8 topics. from the esteemed people here in front. And then we'll pass the mic around where people have questions, interesting ideas, or examples in particular, because of these things can sound kind of abstract, but people may hear about this and have like a really interesting example of when this was a real concern. So anything is welcome. I'm gonna push this along at a swift pace. So the floor over to you. What is transparency in games? Are there particular concerns in transparency with games compared to other kind of AI?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about transparency when it comes to AI, we did some research around AI in games, and obviously AI is often seen as sort of a black box, or could be seen as a black box by the many users, the players, because they don't know what's happening under the hood. Games are complex systems. The AI is part of that system, and you as a player are interacting with it. You may not really know what's going on under the hood. I think what's really interesting is that some games actually are trying to think about how can you open up that black box. So we see some really interesting innovations, especially in indie games, where some of the games allow you to actually tweak or change the parameters of the AI, which I think is a really interesting way to address the issue of transparency. Now, of course, it doesn't really work for all kinds of games. Simulation games might be really interesting to do that. But is that going to work with any type of game? Or do you want to change the parameters of the person you're fighting in a beat 'em up? Maybe it would be nice, depending on what you like. But so there's all these kind of questions about where should we put in transparency? How should it work? Does it make for a better game in the end? But I think one of the things that we do see, and as an example, it's up here too, the Battle of Politopia. One of the issues with that is that people don't necessarily know that they're playing against an AI, especially if you have games where you want to play and there are no other players online. Well, you can have and play against an AI, but do you know that you're playing against an AI? And is that a bad thing or is that not a bad thing? I mean, I think these are the things to kind of discuss and also see, what's the right thing to do. So that's what, I think of when it comes to transparency.
I'm just gonna add something very small, actually. So the way that you describe Casper, like it has the part of transparency and it immediately connects to the control part, right? So one question is like, in transparency, are you just providing information? In some cases, which might be what you just want to do, maybe that's as far as you can go, or it is as far as you would like to go. And the other one is, well, are you introducing control mechanisms? Once the person has the information, can they play around with it? Can they actually say, I prefer this or that? Or the decision is only, I'm actually not going to play this game. Like, is it that level? So that's just a small thing I want to add, but yeah.
I'd like to add to this, just like before I throw it out there, that I think some aspects of games and game AR are intrinsically opposed to transparency. Mm-hmm. You can't have too much because you ruin the game. I think you said some of that, Casper, but like condensing it as a more provocative statement.
Yeah. Yeah, I think actually like this theme runs throughout the whole thing. Like, right. It's very important that we are not trying to ruin the game experience by making everything like super boring and you have to have this like super long onboarding where you choose everything. So the question is really like how do you walk the thin line where you provide enough information or enough control or privacy measures and all of those things and still make it fun.
Audience. I was promising that I got a question here from the chancellor before, like, what if people don't say anything? I'm like, no worries, this crowd will have opinions, always, on everything. I know people here with personal opinions on every single topic. Hands up. Wow. Yes, Simon. No, sorry, Simon. Please. Sorry. Sorry, Simon. I'm not a blonde person with a blue shirt.
I was just wondering if you're going to talk about things related to AI, such as worker displacement or the end of humanity as we know it, or are you really just focusing on AIs that are playing games and issues like personal information divulgence and that kind of thing? What are there are a wide range of ethical issues associated with
As moderator, I'll just step in and say that we have a list of topics and which we go through. End of humanity is not one of them. I'm happy to take that later on, but I think there's a bunch of other topics. The work displacement, I don't know. It seems to be touching on it, kind of.
A little.
Yeah.
A little, yes.
Yeah. But yes.
Hello. Oh, is there somebody else?
No, who was?
That's
Oh, sorry.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I just had a question. When you said transparency, it's not clear to me transparency for which audience, because different audiences have different abilities and skills and things like that. So I'm just curious what you mean by transparency in that regard.
I'll start. Yeah, that's super important, of course, because it doesn't make, in some sense, you have to provide information that matters. And there is no use of providing all the information to everyone. And if we live in a world where we have all the information about everything, we'll have a horrible life. So it's very important that information that is relevant to user, to the player, versus information that's relevant to, let's say, a developer, versus information that's relevant to a policymaker is differentiated and provided also in some sense in different formats. And this sort of comes close to the consent type of discussion in ethics, or terms and conditions, or cookies, all of these things that you agree. And I would love if we start thinking of those things in an innovative fashion as well, and with a good user interface, because it's not possible for all of us to read these terms and conditions and privacy notices, and that, with as much interaction as we have in our lives, we will completely ruin our lives if we think that this is all those things are what we need to use. So we need to think about it also in an innovative fashion and see how do we present these? How do we make sure that you get the enough information with an option to understand more if you need to by maybe clicking to other things, and a developer gets a different set of information that's more relevant with a way of getting to the full set, whatever the full set is, should be somewhere available, of course, but how do you get there?
Yeah, I just want to add that kind of question, just to Johnson's point about product development, I think that's a really important one to ask yourself. Who are the stakeholders and what kind of information do they need in terms of the developers, in terms of the players, in terms of the audience. So it depends on what the AI does, what kind of information transparency is needed. But I think that's sort of a really relevant question that should be part of the development process, that we think about that. So I want to leave it at that. But I think it's a really good question, and as part of that development process, to ask ourselves.
So we have Matt.
Gotta wait for the mic, I guess. Hello. I have maybe a somewhat provocative question. So the games industry has generally been very non-transparent, untransparent, opaque with how game AI works. Are you advocating that needs to change, that they should instead be very transparent with how their game AI works? I'm not sure that matters.
Nope.
It's you first. Not jumping the area.
You were provocative question, yes.
Yeah,
More of those.
I mean, this is a good question that, this is an industry day, right? To kind of go into that discussion with the industry of, there are reasons they obviously keep things opaque and want to be in control. They don't want also, if something goes wrong with AI, they don't want that to be open in the public. And so, I'm just gonna give a managerial response to this, sorry about that. But the way I'm thinking about it is connected to the previous question, is to kind of think about, okay, who are the different players and what kind of transparency can we offer them in a way that it doesn't hurt, the industry or the business? Because let's be frank about it, they don't want to have everything out in the open. But there could be parts of the information that we can think about that could be transparently delivered to the players without harming them. But the question is where do we draw the line, and what can be delivered to the player? What does the company need to know? But the company does need to know what's going on with the AI, right? So I think having that sort of systematic thinking through what can be made transparent, I think is a part of that solution. But yeah, obviously, yeah, I understand that not everything wants to go out in the open. If you know, a lot of damaging content or harmful content becomes clear and everybody sees that, you know, the company wants to probably control some of that,
Can I interrupt?
obviously.
I was thinking less about damaging or harmful content and more about just like boring. Like the players don't need to know how many behavior tree nodes there are in the game, right? I mean, there are certain players that are going to figure it out anyway because they're going to be speedrunners and they're going to study this game, you know, for years and years and find the perfect way to manipulate it. But for most players, does that level of information matter at all? I don't think so.
True, but that is part of the process, right? Like, what information do we want to provide to the players? Like, if we don't need that level of detail, don't need that level of detail. And if people do want to know and we make it available, it can be made available if we want to. But I think thinking about what it is that players do want to know as a question in terms of transparency is something that we have to ask ourselves. But I'm fully with you. You know, like I saw some of those AI games where you could change all those parameters. I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to do all of that or even know what that all means. But it's an interesting experiment to think about. Like, what kind of information do we want to see? What do we want to know about the AI? And I think some of these experimental games are a great way to kind of find out.
Thank you.
Next
topic.
Can I
No,
just add
sorry,
one more
sorry,
thing? But yeah, I think it's important to sort of like, there are two aspects, right? Like the information that the company doesn't want to put in the open, maybe because of like competition purposes, that also comes up a lot. And thinking about it from an ethics perspective, the goal is never to get a company go bankrupt. Because if there is no agent, there is no good behavior either, right? Like, so you want to keep all the players in a way in the system, just make sure that they are not harming the society or the individuals. So on that side, any question related to IP obviously should be carefully thought about. And on the other side, the boring part, also like a boring part and the control part, like you can test those things, right? Like how many players actually are interested in using those controls? That's interesting. How many people, when you make it user-friendly, how many people are interested in reading those things? Like right now, of course, no one would read like those, like many disclaimers because it's horrible, like as I said. But if you made it reasonably approachable, how many people would be interested in reading them? And what matters, to communicate? Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, no, yeah, I'm just like, my role is like moving things forward so we get through these topics, because we're not going to get to the bottom of any of this. There's a lot of interesting stuff. We want you to come away thinking hard about these and going slightly crazy. Next, spicy one, privacy. Games collect lots of data about you as you play them. Like every time you press a button and you move your controller, it is technically a datum that could be collected. Normally it's not collected at that level, normally it's collected at a much more aggregate level, but there's a lot and you can predict a lot from it, and you often don't really think about it in the same way as when you use a social network. So, should we start? Yes.
Yeah, I think we are very familiar with the privacy conversation at this point, I think, in relation to, technology, AI, and I'm not actually sure how much you guys are discussing in games, but...
Not enough.
Okay, well, then super important. That's one way to put it. And I think exactly what you said, like going forward, I think we need to understand that more bodily information we can collect about you, more we can, eye movements, heartbeat, like we can really know everything about you, like your what excites you, your phobias, everything about you. So one way to think about this, of course, is like, well, that can make great games in personalized manner. It will be exactly exciting. The other thing is the system can manipulate you to such a degree that or who did I share this data with, right? Anyone who is interested in understanding your psychology could get a really good sense of that going, especially as we move on in this direction. Do we have safeguards in place to make sure that that data remains wherever you agreed it to remain, with the company or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I just also want to emphasize that there are two sides to this, right? The fact that these games can collect tons of data about you and do player modeling is also an opportunity to learn about yourself, which is one of the great opportunities. I remember playing some games where you have to make ethical decisions. You know, you either, The Walking Dead, so either you save the old person who just saved you, or the child from a zombie. Like, who are you going to save? The child you've never met, or the adult person that just helped you. And then at the end of the game, you see the percentages, and you see what choice you made versus other people. And I thought that was really insightful for myself. And you can imagine that if more and more data is collected in terms of gaze, in terms of other emotional traits, that you could potentially learn a lot about yourself. But that data could also be used in other ways, right? So I think that is a really interesting tension. And the question is, also in terms of control, do you have access to that data? What if you don't want that data to be shared or be used, or you find it confrontational? So I think that's a really interesting part.
But Casper, was that your choice as Casper Harteveld, or was it the choice of the game character you were role-playing as? Because I know that you do lots of things in games you wouldn't do in a normal case, like shoot people.
You don't know about that.
I'm kidding. So this kind of magic circle complicates things a lot, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's open up to the floor. Wait, someone hasn't said it to you? Okay.
Hello, somewhat of an open/proactive question. So I'm familiar that there's currently proactive research in developing things like professional privacy or mathematical tools to be able to guarantee certain privacy depending on what kind of queries you want out of the data. And I was curious what thoughts you had about trying to incentivize game devs to sort of incorporate techniques to make, that might in ways limit the kind of queries they would ask of the data, but would guarantee a level of privacy for the end user. So I was just curious what your thoughts are on like incentivizing devs to do that.
So you're asking for devs to be, when they're doing queries, that they're being mindful that they're querying data from users.
So
right?
there's a large body of work happening right now about developing tools to restrict, to basically guarantee that if you do this specific kind of query, which is very specific, you guarantee that you can't identify the specific people who fulfill that kind of query.
I see.
As an aggregate, you can get information out of it, but you can't really tell who the individual is who sort of contributed to that information. But that limits the kind of things that you can ask of the data. And I was just curious, like, okay, so this is a thing, it's increasing in momentum and hopefully it will continue to develop, but it might limit what you can use the data for. Mm-hmm. And so what ways do you think we have as like a community or as like in terms of people who care about this to incentivize people to like, if you're gonna collect data, maybe consider doing this?
Yeah, I mean, my first response is to actually include ethics people as part of these teams, right? Like, you cannot just have, devs running riot, sorry to use that, on data. It requires training of people who are handling the data, but ideally, from my perspective, you need to have interdisciplinary teams with people who are also be considerate of the privacy of the data that's being collected. So aside from tools, we can delegate everything to tools, but I think it's also important to have humans in the loop, and especially people who know about how to handle privacy matters.
Just to add to that, so privacy by design, I think, is the general name for this, and privacy enhancing technologies, privacy protecting technologies, and as many things in ethics, they come at a cost. You're right. So you give up, you trade off certain abilities in order to enhance the privacy. So the first question to ask is for what type of information we want to have that level of privacy. So what makes sense, right? Because again, privacy, maximum privacy for the sake of privacy is never the goal. So what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And the second thing is to the main part of your question is also something that I am curious about. What's the incentive? Because ethics never is even in human, individual level, I would want every one of us to act in the best possible manner, but that's That's usually not what happens. Like something incentivizes us, either the society, social pressure, rules, norms, and in the bigger scale, like corporation level or industry level, regulations, customer trust, customer engagement. So an interesting question for me is, well, in the gaming industry, where does that incentive would come from? Sometimes just grassroots, like the developers want to start doing this. So yeah, that's something that I am interested in hearing actually.
Anything else on privacy?
So you just mentioned like collecting data about psychophysiology and building player models. To a certain extent, we are basically, so these are private data, right? But it's data that is collected in a transaction which is explicit. I mean, like people want to play the game and like they want to get like some sort of feedback out of it. Like player behavior is also something which like is collected but nobody cares about. But like as you just mentioned, like you can say a lot about like people's choices and I mean, or maybe not. I mean, like, but there is like some sort of inference that can be done about like even just player behavior. So like, what is the difference between like what do you think is the is there like Series A and Series B like private data, like is like eye tracking different from like people like choices made in a game, or is it like heart rate different, and is something more private and less private?
I can start. So I think one way to think about it is like so the official descriptions would be like, you know, identifiable data is the, you know, personal identifiable data is the private data that you're supposed to be protecting and so on. But I think your question is more interesting than this official answer. I think the way to think about it is like, what do you want, what would you be comfortable sharing about yourself, right? One thing is to share, like, here are my choices, like I did these choices. The other thing is like, here's my unconscious reaction about things that I didn't also know. Like certain things really worry me, or certain things make me really scared, certain things really arouse me. Do you want these to be known by parties, let's say the game developers, so that they can make it more manipulative, or great? Or do you want them to be known by your healthcare provider? Do you want them to be known by your potential employer, or, you know, potential school admission officer? Like just think about how far I usually think about insurance, for example. For me, like those are the people that I'm like, do you want the insurance to know certain things? So I think thinking about it as like, what would you be comfortable sharing if you didn't know for what it's going to be used, by whom it's going to be used, and also what do you know about yourself, right? And as soon as you go to the bodily metrics, you will share things that you may also disagree. You know, you can say that I actually can control stress much better than my heartbeat shows, but well, that's in the file now, and they think of you as the extremely stressed person who cannot take this job, for example.
Great, lots of interesting stuff. We're going to move on to the next topic. I also want to remind. I'm sorry, I'm just going to be.
Can you hijack the conference?
Yes, so let's do the rest. Yeah, I'm also going to remind you that the Discord discussion, which is interesting, there were a couple of interesting things coming up on transparency, which we didn't have time for, but keep posting in Discord and discussing that. There's a good channel for it. Okay, we're at user experience. Hey, this is a great sort of film. Yeah, so the question about, I mean, games are, to some extent, about manipulating the player. That's what they do. To some extent, but there's degrees to it. They could potentially, particularly with the use of AI, manipulate people too much or in ways we don't want. And in particular, we're talking about AI experience managers and AI directors. What are the issues here? So.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'm thinking about, like, you know, and obviously Jonsu already mentioned about manipulating, you know, emotions. You know, we're talking about more immersive experiences, potentially using biometrics. Obviously, people enjoy, for instance, horror games and all that. But I'm just thinking about, hearing in the news the first time a player is really in shock about something that they experienced in the game because of the AI. They may find out your biggest fears, or they may have something else, and provide an experience to you that is a shock to the person. And I'm just waiting for that to happen in the news. Maybe I'm a little bit too pessimistic about this all, but that's something that I'm thinking about, when it comes to user experience, and like what kind of consequences the AI may have for players. And that's also, two sides of the coin, right? Like, we want potentially to have horrific experiences, or horror experiences, I should say, that could turn out to be horrific. So that's something that comes to my mind.
We don't have much time.
Yeah, right. Let's pass it on. I mean, I know there are people here in the audience that are working specifically on AI directors for horror games. That's one thing. They have things to say about this, but otherwise we have more questions in the back.
Hello. So, I don't like horror games myself, but I do work with AI experience managers. And this seems like an interesting opportunity where transparency would become important. Kind of getting back to Matthew's comment earlier, but like, it doesn't matter, would it be boring? For the case of an AI system that just kind of plays along with you in the game, maybe that's boring, you don't care about the behavior tree. But in the case where it's an AI experience manager that could provide you with a horror experience, or could provide you with some other kind of experience that might be objectionable somehow, maybe that could be part of how the game is advertised, to say, there's a system here designed to do this. Use at your own risk to some degree. So maybe that's a useful way to think about it, and bring back the privacy, or the transparency element, rather.
But isn't that, just like challenging a little bit, sometimes you want to be surprised, right?
Yeah.
But not with horror.
Yeah, and so the nature of the surprise, I think, would be what you would want to communicate. Like, where emotionally is this experience able to go, or where will it try to take you? And then you buy into that or not based on your current state of mind or whatever. Hopefully that's something that we could do as a community.
That's a good point.
Yeah, just a quick response to say, like, I think expectation management and framing is certainly going to be very important. But there's also a question about, you as developers, or the person who's making the experience manager, to what extent are you in control over what that AI will be doing, right? So I think that's also part of the consideration.
Who's next?
So I kind of like what you were saying about AI, and how in some cases, right, it can provide like these kind of horror experiences, or as I believe you said, with the surprise effect, and kind of just really kind of make it like interesting for the player. And with the horror aspect, I really love that take, because sometimes people tend to be afraid of things, and then when they start to experience it, or maybe are trying to challenge it, they begin to kind of overcome that fear, and really begin to kind of like not be as scared, or maybe grow themselves. To what level can AI kind of keep that? Like, in what sense does the AI kind of have to control itself between, okay, let me introduce this, topic to this user, maybe he'll enjoy it, maybe it helps them overcome a fear, maybe it's, that element of surprise. And then the other aspect of like, okay, when is it too much? When is it too overstimulating? When does it become a problem in which it starts to affect how the user tends to enjoy the game or perceive it overall?
Yeah, I mean, to me, these are all interesting questions in terms of how do we develop these systems, right? Like, you have AIs that manage the AIs, or something else that could be put in place, right? And then there's the question, to Matthew's earlier point, like, how much do people want to fiddle around and not just go with it? And there's also a question about, you could say at the end, this was harmful, or I didn't really like this, but that might be too late, right? And I don't want to be too dramatic here about people experiencing PTSD from playing a game, but certainly if something traumatic happens, you could say, oh, I found this traumatic. but the trauma already happened. So I think, you know, these are kind of interesting questions. Like, obviously there could be this feedback loop, and maybe, you know, something doesn't happen too traumatic, and that helps to give feedback to the AI and say, you know, I like it to be less spicy, or, you know, Stephen ordered on the level of 1 to 10 spicy at the Indian restaurant, 10. You know, I did not, but, you know, you could do something like that, of course, and that's fine. But, you know, at the point that something is going to be overly dramatic, the damage is already done.
So I think so think about like the options, right? Like I completely like building on what you said. Like think about the options. Like you can put it in a way trigger warning, and you can also say that I don't want to see the trigger warning. Like maybe you can add that option. Like I want to take my chances. Like yes, in the end I'll give the feedback, and it's my responsibility that I decided not to see it. But at least you can give that option to people, right? And I think so especially I think this point really brings home the idea that the ethical decisions are like, you're not just like, oh, like what about the user privacy? What about like data collection? It's really the whole thing is like basically all the ethical decisions go into building the whole thing. And all of these are decisions that you have to carefully make, just like you're carefully making all the other design decisions, right? So there will not be like a rule of thumb, always do this. Maybe there will be some rule of thumbs, like always have the option of trigger warning. But beyond that, what goes into a trigger warning? How do you allow users to pass it? And maybe some games you don't allow the user to pass it because the risk is too high. But all of these are like you have to carefully craft it. So it's really like the ethics decision really goes into the whole decision making.
Right. Thank you. I will move us on to the next question. So content moderation. So basically, we have an issue that anyone who has participated in anonymous game chats or anonymous voice channels when playing a game may have encountered that people are not always entirely civil. Understatement for dramatic effect. There's an interesting thing here where like AI is definitely an opportunity to sort of automate some aspects of content moderation. There's also potential issues with it. There's lots of potential issues with this. So does AI have a role in content moderation, not only chats, but also like building game content and user-generated content, and what are issues with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so content moderation is one of the topics that are not, I think that is not like super unique to gaming in some sense, you know, because we have the content moderation problem that has been going on in multiple different platforms, and also in gaming you can think about in-game and also like the platforms that are attached to games. So the AI question is, can we make sure that we use and now with the ChatGPT and generative AI systems, can we use the AI systems in such a way that we can fight this problem better than we have been fighting it? Because content moderation is like an unresolved issue that we have been trying to deal with for many years now. And it only gets more tricky as content is also generated with AI at this point. So I don't have an answer, but I think this is one of the questions that you cannot ignore it because it's large enough and it has to be cracked in some sense.
I suggest to move on to the others.
Yeah, I just wanted to, it's like a side comment on this, is that there is again the issue with a magic circle of games, that inside a game you're to some extent someone else, you're outside a game. So a comment in a game such as like, well, I'm going to kill you, is something that it might be totally appropriate depending on the game and the situation, but like not on Facebook, for example, or something.
So it's even harder in games.
It's even harder, yeah. There was a case recently where someone was, I don't know how recently, someone had a company account suspended because telling one of the team members to go kill yourself so that they could respawn. And that was deemed not okay, but it was completely reasonable communication in the context of the game. Audience. Comments and questions, provocations.
Hi, thank you. So I'm one of these fake philosophers, so I'm happy to present you with trolley problems. blague à part, so to build upon what you said, like toxicity is very culturally situated. So like trash talking, for instance, like I have a friend who is a great game a scholar in game studies, so he's a reasonable person in that. And so apparently in Garage or Killing, he's one of the most trash talking person there is, and everyone does it. He's a really great player to be with. And I think it's a big issue with games. As soon as we started to have common servers, lots of community of practice, like when online gaming kind of emerged, first it was lobbies, servers, people creating custom games and stuff like that. And as we moved on from that to cloud computing and blah, 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 everyone is everywhere all at once, to quote movies. So what now, as someone who has actual thoughts in the matter?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't, this is, the questions that we are posing are the hard questions, right? Like there is no easy answer that I can give to you, but taking it out of gaming, like this type of like culture versus the circumstances, the context, and the type of language. Years ago, Twitter was dealing with this because the question was like, well, when is it a curse word, when is it a slang? And in which subgroups it is a slang that's totally acceptable, whereas where is it like completely unacceptable? And all this, again, this is like, this only becomes a bigger issue and more complex issue when you have this division that Julian talks about, you know, like the real life versus gaming versus real people still talking to each other. And you have the question of generative AI added to it. So it only makes it more complex. But, and like, you know, one thing that I at least want to stress is like any progress you can make on this without completely becoming a killjoy is a good thing to do. So it's not like, oh, we have the ultimate answer. Yeah, that's going to be pretty difficult. We are trying. But any progress is still going to be a good way to go forward.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I just want to add two things about the cultural sensitivity of it, right? Like, and how do you can detect that and how that happens, and just like two examples. So one is I'm originally from the Netherlands, and we tend to swear a lot in English. I won't say, but you can probably, you know. And one of the things that I always think about is maybe we use English swear words because they don't sound as bad. But if somebody from the United States or England comes over and they hear all these Dutch people use these words, they're like, that's kind of inappropriate. But that's the cultural sensitivity. So for Dutch people, you know, those words may sound less harmful or less, you know, problematic. The other context that I'm thinking about is also sports. You know, there's esports, and I'm talking about trash talking. You know, like if you look at sports, I'm sure that, you know, not so nice words are being said on the field. You can discuss whether or not maybe we all should grow up and start not swearing at each other. But, you know, if something happens, you know, on the field or whatever sports, I mean, things will be said. So, you know, how does that work with esports and, you know, thinking about trash talking and who do you talk to? So there's a lot of context that makes it a very complex problem in terms of content moderation.
Yeah, and the goal is definitely not to like sterilize the whole thing. Like the goal is to make sure that you preserve the richness of the language, and cursing is a part of the richness of the language, while still while still making sure that the real harm, real toxicity is not taking over.
I don't. Just a quick
I think
question.
we should have a microphone for the people who are online. So we should have.
I was just going to say, I mean, this is great for the toxicity in terms of the players playing, but the AI models are being built on player behavior, and once players know that their behavior is influencing a model, they have the ability to use their behavior to influence the model. So when it comes to content moderation, I guess the real argument is, like, who's moderating the system to understand how it's learning, what it's learning, to avoid creating, you know, NPCs that mimic that toxic behavior or sexist and racist languages we've seen AI models do in the past.
I think that's relevant. I don't know why microphone is so much louder than the others, but I'll try to be quiet. I think that's a very relevant comment, like so how the AI models train. There's also user-made content. So there is the TTP metric when you have user-made levels or items and so on, which is the time to penis. When someone submits the first user-generated content, it is a penis, because it always happens. And should you moderate this automatically?
Do we have more?
We have a bunch of more topics, and I don't want to. We should finish not too much late, so let's move on to bias. Oh, this is the archetypical AI ethics topic.
Yeah, core of AI, one of the cores of AI ethics topics. So basically, the core topic remains. It's just now applied to the gaming context. So the bias question is looking at all the data that you have. And first of all, of course, what kind of data you have, right? Like what makes it into a data set? What is left out of the data set? So from the data set, the system, is it learning the biases that already exist? Well, unjust biases, that's one thing. Because there will always be bias, there will always be some differentiation. So that's not what we are trying to avoid. What we are trying to avoid is making sure that there is no unjust bias. So bad discrimination, let's put it that way. And here, you have the questions related to lack of data related bias, so things that the system just does not know, things that the data does not contain, so it doesn't learn to know about that data. And the other one is more historical unjust behavior. So if there is always consistently, there are reasons for certain groups to be in disadvantaged positions consistently, and that's usually the racial bias, the sexist bias, and all of those, then the system learns to replicate that. So one of them basically is easier to fix. You just need to balance the data better. The other one is way harder to fix because, well, we come from a society, we have a society that always has some unjust bias, some discrimination going on, and the problem with the AI system is that it just replicates that, it just makes it bigger, and there is no escape from it. So I'll move it to you.
Sure, yeah, I actually got intrigued by Steven's comment and want to add that here too. Like you have the bias that comes from the models or the data that's out there, but there's also a bias that the players can add, which actually is part of the playful nature of people, that they want to test out the system and make it do something else. Well-known examples are some of the crowdsourcing games, like there was the ESP game from Louis van Aan and others, where they had images being labeled on Google, and Google got it, and then players started to play it and make sure that it would have different tags associated with the images. So the idea was, through crowdsourcing you would be tagging images on Google. But then people found out about it, and then they made sure that inappropriate tags would be associated with the images. And so I think that is also just an interesting aspect around the biases. I am going to moderate the moderator and say that we should probably be wrapping up in about 1 minute. So
we can go through what are the other topics we didn't have time to talk about.
Exactly.
Just like, so we have, now I disappeared here.
Yeah.
Maybe that's for the better.
Yeah.
Apparently. So, what did we not have time to talk about? Content generation. Just like, say one sentence. Okay. So wow. This is so we need to finish here. Content generation. There are issues. Okay. There's nothing anywhere. Like there's no microphone access simply.
No, really?
Yep. That's right.
Oh yeah. Oh no, it's working. Okay.
This one goes. Interesting. It's conspiracy. Issues related to content generation, generating harmful content, which is a very complicated thing. It's very hard to control content generators as you are. What about human content creators? Ownership, who owns content generated by AI? This touches on the work job displacement thing, which is a very, very, very fraught and very, in some cases, infected topic at the moment. And we have responsibility. Who is responsible for what AI does? I mean, as game creators, we prefer not to be responsible, as AI researchers as well, and as game players even more so. And then what should we do? So we have another hour of discussion we're not going to have here, but I can encourage you to continue this over lunch breaks, lunches, dinners, late night drinking sessions. Final words.
Just for the what should we do section, I mean, I think Casper already said this, like, knowing that we have these questions, right? Like, there is no way that you can say that, well, actually, this doesn't, it's not relevant for my area of work, or this is not relevant for the game that I'm playing with or dealing with. So we have these questions. I think the one thing to do is, like, admit that we have these questions and start working on them, knowing that we may not get the perfect solution, but any solution, any progress is better than no progress. Again, Casper mentioned, you know, and Julian sort of like mentioned with the actual philosopher thing, it's good to have ethical mindset and to be excited about ethics, but recognize that ethics, if you want to take it seriously and take it out of fluff, it is something that requires systematic working on. So work with philosophers, work with ethicists, and really work with them. Don't get an approval, don't get a rubber stamp. Make sure that they also understand that they should collaborate with you for finding a solution and not just tell you this is not working. No, this is harmful. Well, yeah, many things in life are harmful. We are trying to make it better. That should be the goal.
I don't really have anything to add. I just want to say that perhaps there's pizza with pineapple. That's also a whole discussion to have during lunch. But
I'm Italian. I'm sorry. I'm triggered whenever I can't do it. That's very unethical. Speaking of ethics, you know.
Who has the responsibility?
For pineapple on
Yeah,
pizza,
yeah.
Hawaiians, Americans, who has, I don't know, whoever
Okay,
has
generally,
that responsibility.
yeah. But I want to thank you all for this conversation and just what Johnson said. You know, this is a conversation starter. You know, one of the reasons we put this panel here is to make sure that we're all starting to think about it. Fortunately, we do have a talk later today about the ethics of AI in games. So there will be more conversation around this, and we hope during and throughout the entire week we'll also have conversations around this. So thank you all, and enjoy your lunch.